When I was packing for my Virgin Voyages trip to Alaska, I have to admit I was still a bit skeptical of whether this trip was going to be for us. Having done previous cruises with stops in Norway and Iceland, I was assuming this northern itinerary was going to be very much the same. But actually, what Virgin Voyages have done with Alaska has really made all the difference. But I do think with Virgin Voyages having a different take on these things, sometimes it comes off really well, sometimes it misses the mark. So today I want to walk you through what we think are the pros and cons of sailing to Alaska with Virgin Voyages. If this is your first time here, my name is David from VV Insider, which is a website all about Virgin Voyages and nothing else. And quite often when you think of Virgin Voyages, you think of those Mediterranean and those Caribbean destinations that they're so well known for. Well, this year is their first year venturing up north to Alaska, and they've put a huge amount of effort into not only making sure the ship is ready for it, but also the entertainment and events are ready for Alaska as well. So let's kick today off by telling you what actually happens in Alaska when it comes to Virgin Voyages and why it is so different. So our trip was a 7-night voyage leaving from Seattle with 3 port stops. We stopped in Ketchikan, in Sitka, in Prince Rupert in Canada, with a few sea days sprinkled in between before we headed back to Seattle. You of course get the signature Virgin Voyages experience on board, but in Alaska it is slightly different. There's actually a whole slew of new events and entertainment that's specifically made for Alaska, and these are peppered across the entire voyage. And I'll be touching on more of them as we go through the pros and cons. But what's really cool about these voyages is that they do bring in 3 new members of the entertainment team. 2 of them are Happenings cast members, and 1 of them is a local heritage guide. So those 2 extra Happenings cast members are the Lumberjack and the Naturalist. Again, I'll talk about them more in just a moment. The ship has also been minimally optimized for those colder temperatures, so there has been a few changes that make it a little bit more comfortable in those colder climates. There has also been an emphasis in Alaska of making sure that the shore things, or the port excursions, are really suited to not only the local nature and culture, but also take into consideration Virgin's adult-only approach to cruising. So those are the headlines for Alaska. Those are the things you probably read about before. So we're going to delve a little bit deeper when we talk about the pros and cons. So let's talk about pro number 1, and that is Alaska really did hold up to their end of the bargain when it comes to that incredible Alaska nature experience. So the wildlife that we saw on this trip has to be my number 1 pro of the entire journey. As I mentioned, we've done those colder weather cruises before in Norway and Iceland, but never before have I seen this much wildlife just even on the cruise itself. You don't even need to be out in port to see this happening. But actually, even from the decks of the ship, you're seeing pods of whales float by. You're seeing bald eagles flying through the sky. We also, on one morning, eating our brunch at the wake, were able to see sea lions and otters out in the distance. I swear I saw more whales from the deck of Brilliant Lady on this trip than we saw on a dedicated whale watching experience we had when we were back in Victoria earlier this year. So going into this, I knew that we would have the chance to see some wildlife at the ports that we were stopping in, but I wasn't really expecting us to be able to see so much from the ship. That was really eye-opening and a really lovely surprise. There was actually a real buzz around the ship whenever we could spot wildlife. So we were just in the galley one day having lunch, and somebody had spotted whales out in the far distance, and you could see loads of people gathering at the windows and pointing to what they were seeing out on the ocean. This leads to a lovely community style atmosphere, and actually a lot of people got meeting one another and talking to one another just by looking out and seeing what was in the ocean. I've got to say as well, the scenery in Alaska is like nothing I've ever seen before. It doesn't really compare to Norway and Iceland. It's very different. Certainly there's a lot more forest and trees in Alaska than there is in Norway and Iceland. I could definitely see that the landscape was very, very different indeed. And that brings me on to pro number 2, which is the clever ways that Virgin have introduced you to the nature that you're sailing by. So seeing the wildlife and the nature is fantastic, but you need to know where to look. So there's a few different places that Virgin have been able to show you this. And one of the ways they've been able to do this is the introduction of one of the new Happenings cast members, which is the Naturalist. So this is a temporary Happenings cast member that is only on board for these Alaska sailings, but the Naturalist was one of those new members introduced at Sail Away, and she was actually incredibly knowledgeable about the scenery that we were floating by and also the ports that we were visiting as well. So the Naturalist role actually embraces technology really well on the ships. So there's a couple of ways that she did this. One of the ways was a little bit more manual, where she actually set up a group on WhatsApp where she would tell you when there was whale sightings or nature sightings that you wanted to be aware of on that moment. So I joined her WhatsApp group and had a scroll through, and there was a few times over the last few days where she had mentioned that there were whales on a particular side of the ships, so you could see the pods of whales floating by. And it was really nice to get these up to the minute alerts. So if you weren't doing anything or you were able to go outside and take a look, you were able to run over with your camera and see what was out there. But then another really cool feature was that when the Naturalist was hosting her outdoor events, she was also broadcasting her voice across the network through the Virgin Voyages app. So this was really cool because it didn't matter where you were on board the ship, but you could tune in to the Naturalist talking about what you were sailing past. So here's just a demonstration of us dialing in to one of these live sessions while we were sitting on the rocks. Now, of course, we couldn't see much on the rocks, but if you were out or if you were in a private space outside, you could see what was going on and what the Naturalist was talking about. So you can imagine being on your balcony in your red hammock and listening to what the Naturalist is telling you about the scenery that you're floating past. It's very, very cool indeed. A couple of places they made slightly more comfortable in this colder weather, including the very back of the galley, the outdoor area there. It's actually called the Snug if you're not aware, but this place has actually been retrofitted with heaters in the ceiling. So these electric radiating heaters are a really nice touch, and it means that it's much more pleasant to sit out there, especially in those colder days. There's also those static lounge chairs that are on deck 7 on the promenade deck. They're actually especially retrofitted with heating pads to make it a little bit more comfortable as well. There's also really comfortable blankets available pretty much everywhere on those outdoor places and the ship, including the dock. We actually stopped by the dock during golden hour. This is the Alaskan answer to Opa Hour, which you get on the other ships, where there are themed drinks and snacks relating to Alaska. So during this time, there were hors d'oeuvres that were themed to the local area, including salmon and berries and dill. Lovely, lovely combinations that was so nice to enjoy in this open scenery, but also you had those blankets to keep you warm as well. So that special event on the dock isn't the only thing you're going to see on the lineup when it comes to Alaska, and that is because Virgin Voyages have put the effort in to doing more than 20 different happenings events just for Alaska, and that is way more than they really needed to do, but they've really put everything in to making sure that the ship feels really different for Alaska. And with these happenings events, they really did, to the point where it feels like they really didn't have to go this hard, but I'm so glad they did, because the happenings events that we went along to that were Alaska themed were really fantastic. So a couple of things that really stood out, and this is the other happenings cast member that I wanted to talk about, and that is the Lumberjack. Again, this is a temporary happenings cast member just for this Alaskan season, and the Lumberjack is even more temporary than you would think, because actually they get on board in Seattle, but they actually leave in Ketchikan, and that's for a good reason. In Ketchikan, there is the Great Lumberjack Show, which is the hallmark attraction in Ketchikan. It's a timber sports show that is all based around 2 teams of lumberjacks competing for the win. It's a huge amount of fun. I'm so glad we went along to it during one of our port excursions. But one of the cast members actually joins the ship as the Lumberjack, the Happenings cast member. So they get on board in Seattle, and they're on board for 2 days, and they're on board until they get to Ketchikan, where they get off and join their normal job, which is part of the cast of the Great Lumberjack Show. And one of the events that they co-host in the Red Room with another couple of the Happenings cast members is a really fun timber sports themed game show, which includes some fun interactive elements before you get to the main event, which is this live axe throwing competition. So sailors are invited to join into this live axe throwing contest. Some of our friends were invited to this during the sail away party. So if you're looking to join in the fun of this axe throwing contest, see if you can flag down the lumberjack during the sail away party and you might have some spaces left. But if you're participating in this, you arrive a little bit earlier to this show so you can be shown how to go about the live axe throwing. But this was a really cool event. Even though our side did very poorly indeed in the initial rounds, we eventually won during the live axe throwing competition. But you've got to be quick if you want to attend the Lumberjacks events because, like I say, they're only on for a couple of days of the voyage. Another really cool free event is called Last Light, and this is hosted on the last day that you're in Alaska. So as you're coming away from Alaska, it's the last sunset that you're going to see. And this is an event that is led by the hostess. We were lucky enough to have Mitchie, the hostess, during our Alaskan voyage, and she did an incredible job of this event, which is a love letter to the sunset of Alaska. It has a lovely story to it, and there's also a live vocal performance by the hostess as well. During this event, you'll also see the Naturalist and the Alaskan Heritage Guide roaming around as well, so you can have a conversation with them and talk about the experiences that you've had in Alaska. It's a really, really lovely event. A couple of other incredible Alaskan happenings highlights were the things that we paid for. So one of the things was Baking Alaska. This was $35 and it was a dessert making class. So we were able to get hands on and decorate this chocolate cheesecake using some berry compote and some other decorations. We were then encouraged to take photos of these desserts by the window, and we just happened to be sailing by the glacier at the time, so it was a perfect backdrop to our desserts. This was paired with a few samplings of wine and whiskey from the bar as well. But the crowning glory of this event was when we were able to make our own vegan baked Alaskas, where we were able to pipe on the vegan meringue mix, and then it was handed over to one of the head pastry chefs on board who was able to use a blowtorch to really set our baked Alaska off. This was a really cool event, and it was hosted by Mecca the foodie that did such a good job of explaining every single step of the process when it comes to making these desserts on board, but also just made it a really fun event as well. So hats off to Mecca for making it such a great experience. Then the other paid for happenings event we went along to was called Drawn to the Wild. This was $25 each, but it was a really cool experience in the manor. So using lighting technology and sound, they've been able to transform the manor into this really immersive forest-like atmosphere. And you're guided through 3 short movies which explain 3 different types of art that you're encouraged to replicate using art supplies and paper that you're provided with. Now, Verena, the artist, was careful to explain that this is not a guided art class, but more an art experience. So you're able to use your own imagination and really draw whatever you like. And I actually just used my phone to Google how to draw a bear, otherwise I was going to make an incredible mess of it. And it guided me through the building block shapes that I needed, 2 circles and the lines to add. And eventually I came out with this, which I think actually turned out quite well. But this was just a really cool event and a really nice opportunity to have a little bit of a slower change of pace through the day as well. I would really recommend this one, and $25 is not very much at all. I think I got 2 glasses of sparkling wines. So I'm assuming the cost of those 2 glasses of wine is around about $25 anyway, but you get to take your art creations home as well. So it's a win-win. Those really were our highlights. There are a lot more happenings events going on when it comes to Alaska, but really we just did not have the time to try them all out. The event lineup is absolutely packed, especially on those sea days or those scenic sea days. There's definitely a few that we saw on the lineup that we have such FOMO around and we really want to try out next time. Pro number 4 for us was definitely about choosing the right shore things or the right port excursions when you're on your Alaska trip. So we did a shore thing on each of our 3 port stops, but one of them in particular was really fantastic. And that was the day that we visited Sitka. So we did a shore thing that was called Bears, Fjords and Homesteads Day. So this started off by visiting the bear sanctuary in Sitka, where we got really up close and personal with these bears that were being protected from euthanasia. It was a really nice experience to get that close and personal with bears. But actually on the previous day in Ketchikan, during one of our shore things, we actually saw some wild bears, including a mother and 3 cubs just across the river from us. So as lovely as it was to see bears in this sanctuary, and it's great the work that they do, I think for us seeing bears in the wild was even more special. But back to our Sitka day, after we'd been to the bear sanctuary, we boarded a boat that took us down through the fjord. And this was a really fantastic boat ride. And it was actually headed up by a skipper and a naturalist that was talking us through all of the different things that we were going past. So during this trip, we saw eagles, we saw a sea lion up close, and we saw tons and tons of salmon leaping around as well. After this lovely scenic boat tour, we ended up at this homestead, which was a remote shack that included snacks and hot drinks, and we were able to even toast our own s'mores above an open fire. During this little stay, after you toasted your s'mores, you were able to sit and listen to the guides tell you about tales from the local area. After this lovely stay at the homestead, we boarded the boat and headed back to the ship. That was a really special shore thing, and I don't think we would have seen half of the wildlife that we saw on the trip without taking one of those port excursions. So although what we did in Sitka was our highlight, we also really enjoyed Ketchikan. In Ketchikan, our shore thing started off by visiting the Great Lumberjack Show, like I mentioned earlier. This was such a fun show, and everyone that we were with really enjoyed it. From the show, we were then taken by trolley bus over to a local totem park where we were told about the history of totem, but also that was where we saw those wild bears. So all in all, that was a fantastic excursion. And then in Prince Rupert, which was our stop in Canada, we had a nature hike where we were taken by a local guide who talked us through all of the local flora and fauna. And that was just a lovely walk in a really beautiful nature park. Now, after all of those fantastic things, you're probably thinking, well, what were the cons? Well, there was 4 things that we did notice. So let me talk you through them. So the first con was pretty obvious to us even before the Alaskan season got started, and that's just with the design of the Virgin Voyages ships. They're not really made to be indoor ships. These really are made for warm weather. And although Brilliant Lady has made some adaptations and made it a bit more comfortable for those colder days, there is certainly some room for improvement, but really there's nothing they can really solve on this current class of ships anyway. The biggest problem that we noticed was just that there's not enough places indoors to really enjoy the scenery. The only places with really big windows is the galley, which it is nice that you've got these sort of floor to ceiling windows and they're great, but you are having to look over the top of people enjoying their lunch and dinner. So as you can see here, it's all a little bit awkward when you spot something in the distance, but it's in a busy dining area. The other indoor public spaces are on deck 7, but really a lot of the windows are either covered or there's seating in front of them. So there's not really a huge amount of places you can sit or stand and just look out to the scenery if it's bad weather. On other carriers, you may see places like observation lounges or solariums that are inside spaces with large windows. That really does not exist anywhere on the Virgin Voyages ships. We were really lucky on our voyage because for the majority of the time, the weather was very dry, but there was one occasion where it was raining, and that's where the weaknesses really came through. Because everyone was trapped inside, we ended up going down to deck 7, and in particular, the area near the social club was incredibly congested. But I think when it's cold and raining, you can't really escape from it on Virgin Voyages. If, for example, you're in the galley and you need to get to the forward of the ship, if you walk through deck 15, there is no way to do it without at least coming into some contact with the rain. That being said though, obviously these ships were not built for the cold weather initially, so I do think those little bits that they've done to the ship to make it a little bit more comfortable in the cold weather are very welcome, but there's not a huge amount you can do if it's raining. Con number 2 might be down to us, but we just didn't get the sense that Virgin Voyages explained well enough the things that you needed to know about the itinerary. So on any other cruise line, you would obviously have the captain coming over the loudspeaker pretty much every day telling you what to look out for, especially when you're sailing past particular parts of the world. If you know much about Virgin Voyages, you'll know that those type of public announcements don't really happen, which is a good thing if you're trying to relax and forget about things. But if, like us, you don't pay a lot of attention to things that are written down, sometimes an announcement like that would be very helpful. One thing that really tripped us up was that on the first sea day, which traditionally for us means a little bit of a lie-in after PJ party, we were doing some scenic cruising through the inside passage. So we woke up around about 10 o'clock and looked out the window, and it was very pretty indeed. It was a little bit foggy, but it was nice. And we said to ourselves, right after lunch, we're going to get the camera out and take some footage of this lovely passage through the inside passage. Little did we know that was it. As soon as we went for lunch, we were missing the entire thing. And by the time we got ourselves turned around, we looked out of the window and we couldn't see anything at all. Well, we had no way of knowing that the inside passage scenic cruising was limited to just the morning. But again, if we had an announcement or somebody had told us, we might have known. So I think next time we would probably do a little bit more research on this and find out exactly where we were sailing, why it was significant, where to stand on board. Things like this would be really useful to know. But maybe this was just us. Maybe it was written down on a piece of paper in the cabin or something like that and we just overlooked it. If you've been on one of these Alaska cruises and you think that we're the problem, please let me know in the comments because I'd love to know. On a similar vein, con number 3 is about that some of the best programming is so easy to miss. And this really became apparent when we were sitting enjoying the Great Lumberjack show in Ketchikan, and I was speaking to a sailor next to me and she was saying, oh, this is great, but how does everyone know Ethan's name? Ethan was one of the lumberjacks. I said, oh, well, he's been on board. He is the lumberjack on board the ship. And she was like, what? There's no lumberjack on the ship. And I said, there is, he's been doing events. Well, actually, that just shows you how easy it is to miss out on some of these things. We obviously knew who the lumberjack was because we've reported it on this channel a few times, but I can absolutely see why it would be very, very easy to miss unless somebody had pointed it out that there was very special events in the app. Of course, they do introduce those new roles during the sail away party, and that of course is where we met the lumberjack and some of our friends got invited to do the throwing. But I will say, unless you were actually there and paying a lot of attention, you might miss that as well. I do think as well, for those that are in tune with the Happenings cast, so those of you that follow our Happenings cast articles over on vbinsider.com, for example, it's good to know who you're expecting to see on board when it comes to the Happenings cast. Well, because of the transient nature of the Lumberjack and the Naturalist had just switched out the voyage before ours, so it was a brand new role even for her. The Lumberjack was switched out a couple of times before we got on board, so I think this was the 3rd or 4th Lumberjack that they had. Well, it would be nice if there was a little bit more longevity to that and they communicated that out a little bit more. It'd be nice to get to know these roles before you head on board the ship. I think in that way, people would miss a lot less when they go on board and get a little bit more excited about the events that are showing up on the schedule. I only think this is a miss because the product itself and the events itself are so good. I just think it's a shame when other people are missing them. So I think it would be nice if Virgin Voyages, the brand, were a little bit more celebratory and told people about these fantastic things that were going on. And then con number 4 is that this felt like the quickest trip I think I've ever had on Virgin Voyages. And we've done 4 and 5 night sailings before, but this went over in a flash. And I think it's because the itinerary was really quite short. So it was a 7-night voyage, but it started with a sea day. We then had Ketchikan, and then we stopped in Sitka, and then there was another sea day, and then we had Prince Rupert, and then we had another sea day. So actually, we only had 2 stops in Alaska on this Alaskan voyage. We had Ketchikan and we had Sitka. The last stop, of course, is in Canada, so it's quite similar in terms of the scenery and the nature that you're seeing, but of course it's not Alaska. And this is all to do with a really antiquated law in the United States that if there's a cruise ship leaving from an American port, it needs to at least stop in another country before it comes back to an American port. Well, because Virgin Voyages and many other cruise ships are registered in the Bahamas, then this rule applies to them. So they have to stop somewhere, and they had to stop in Canada before they came back. which meant that we only got 2 stops in Alaska. So for us, it felt like our Alaskan voyage had finished almost halfway through. We were waving goodbye to Alaska when we had basically 2 full days left. So we did feel a little bit shortchanged there. But I do think if we were to do it all over again, we would choose a longer voyage or a voyage with more ports. So all that being said, and weighing up the pros and the cons, I would certainly say that Alaska for us was such a pleasant surprise. I was expecting it to be so similar to Norway and Iceland, but actually for us, I thought it was such a different experience, and it's definitely something I would like to go back and do again. Maybe not straight away, I would maybe wait a couple of years and do a longer one, but there's so much that we didn't get to try, including one shore thing that I think was so prohibitively expensive. And this was on the glacier day. There was an opportunity for you to take a small boat that would go out from Brilliant Lady and go closer to the glacier. And I've heard such great things about this, and it's supposed to be amazing. But the price for this started at $200 per sailor, which is already quite expensive. But by the time that we ended up sailing, they'd put the price up and up and up, I assume because people kept selling it out. But actually when we sailed, it was $450 per sailor. So that's $900 for us as a couple. And I just think that is incredibly prohibitively expensive. I know many people would pay it, but this is already quite an expensive voyage to start with. So to ask people to pay an extra $900 on top of their vacation, it seems a little bit too much for us. But do let me know if you ended up on that excursion, whether it cost you $200 or $450. Was it worth it? It did sound really good from what we heard, but it'd be great to hear from a real point of view, a real sailors that ended up doing that excursion in the glacier. So do let me know in the comments. We're very interested indeed about that one. As I mentioned earlier, we got up to so many fun things during this voyage, and there's a few little insider tales I'd love to tell you about. So if you're interested in hearing those silly little tales and a few other things that we've got in our hidden series, then we'd really appreciate your support in our YouTube members program. So those of you that are kind enough to support our work in the YouTube membership program, if you're a rock star or a mega rock star, you get access to our hidden series of videos where we tell you a little bit more insider tales from our journeys, but also we tell you some secret tips about sailing with Virgin Voyages as well. We're so thankful for those of you that already support us on our YouTube members program, but if you'd like to find out more and join that program yourself, then the details are on screen right now, and we'll also include the details in our description below. But I'll be putting together a new hidden series video telling you a few more tales from Alaska, and that'll be up for you in the next week or so. Well, for everyone here on YouTube, we'll be releasing our Virgin Voyages Insider Update for the end of August next week, and there's so much news that we need to catch up on, so I'm looking forward to putting that together for you. So make sure that you're subscribed to this channel so you get notified when that comes out, and I'll tell you all about the news and updates and all the changes that are coming to Virgin Voyages soon. Well, thank you so much for coming along today and hearing about what we thought of Virgin Voyages in Alaska, but until I see you next time, happy sailing.